My name is Faduma from the programming team at TCAF. Welcome to Anarchism in Comics, in conversation with Ben Passmore and Gord Hill. Before we begin, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are in a territory that was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee and Allied nations to share and care for the land. And we also acknowledge that this area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And so TCAF makes this acknowledgement as a reminder that we're all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to the land and each other. And this acknowledgement is a touchstone in our process of thinking through what it means to live in colonized land and is an expression of solidarity with our Indigenous siblings. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities in Toronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into our virtual program titled Anarchism in Comics. We are joined today by Gord Hill and Ben Passmore to discuss the use of comics and zines to document and communicate their experiences and insights on organizing, anarchism, and counterculture. We explore what prompts one to choose this medium to share information and even mobilize. We will touch on intersections of anarchism, abolitionism, and critiques of pacifism as well. Of course, we cannot cover all these things mentioned within an hour's length, but I'm grateful to even scratch the surface with y'all. So a bit about each comic artist joining us. Gord Hill is an Indigenous writer, artist, and activist of the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. He is the author and illustrator of the 500 Years of Indigenous Resistance comic book, the Anti-Capitalist Resistance comic book, and the Anti-Fat comic book, all three published by Arsenal Pulp Press in Vancouver, as well as the author of the book 500 Years of Indigenous Resistance, published by AK Press in Oakland, California. His art and writings have also been published in numerous periodicals, including Briar Patch, Canadian Dimension, Red Wire, Red Rising Magazine, The Dominion, Recherche Amérindienne au Québec, Intotecmac, Seattle Weekly, and Broken Pencil. Thanks so much for joining us, Gord. We also have Ben Passmore. Ben Passmore's work contains cold takes on politics, riots, anarchism, police brutality, history, sports, identity, and the unrelenting awareness of all of that. His work has wandered on the New York Times, Believer magazine, and Lab magazine, as well as frequent contributions to the Nib. His book, Sports is Hell, is a story about football riots, political tensions, and kneeling. It won the 2021 Eisner Award for Best Single Issue. His latest graphic novel, following the lives of 7 armed Black insurrectionaries, These Black Arms to Hold You Up, is in the works, he swears. And now, before we jump into it, I just want to put out there that this is not intended to be a standard conversation. I truly believe that these conversations should be accessible, and often in these conversations, they tend to be inundated with art speak and academic speak. And if the intention is to create a better world through sharing information and insights that can strengthen our community's understanding and to encourage imagining a world outside of the capitalist structure that we exist in, I truly believe it starts with accessible language. It's so easy to fall into gatekeeping habits. And when having these discussions and when I engage in Ben and Gord's work, I don't see or I don't sense that these stories are not intended for me to read and assess where I'm at with it all. So I'm saying to all who are tuning in, I'm here to learn too, which is why I'll be asking questions to prompt a discussion. And these questions are from myself and the community. Ben Passmore and Gord Hill, thanks so much again for taking the time to share your insights with us. On that note, I'll be invisibly asking questions for myself and the community in the prompts, and I'll let you both take it away.
Okay, thanks for having me. What's up, Gord? Hey, how's it going? Are we supposed to start talking now?
Yeah, I was curious. Is there a kickoff question? Oh, okay, here we go. There's, I don't know, put in that. The question addresses the process of putting an idea into an image. What does anti-fascism look like? If you were to draw a single panel to not necessarily explain, but to hint at that vibe, who or what does that panel look like?
Anti-fascism. I would have anti-fascists attacking fascists to start with. That would be my vibe.
Yeah, very straightforward. Yeah. My sense is that from the work that I've read of yours is that it's very much like you have a lot of history stuff, but also it's like there's a lot of passion for very real resistance that's happened and happening, which I also feel. I have some friends who are, I don't say this derogatorily at all, but much more arty than me. So when they're like, what are visual interpretations of anti-fascism? And that can look like some sort of like very expressive sort of like, sort of like art piece. But for me, as you said, I'd be like, yeah, I mean, I would just have anti-fascists punching fascists in the face. I try to make it a little funny
Right.
myself.
Yeah. Your stuff has a lot more humor in it, and it kind of lightens up some of the heaviness of the politics, which I've always been stuck because of my whole influence with comics was back in the 70s when I actually read comics, and I was really influenced by Jack Kirby, and his stuff is very dynamic, and it's I wouldn't say it's really serious, but he tries to draw more kind of realistic, and it's just very action oriented. So I use that as kind of a big influence for me. I try to put humor in my comics a little bit though, but it might be harder to see it and whatnot. But yeah, because humor is such an important part of our politics as well, and being able to laugh at fascists, for example, or ridicule them, or the ruling class, or whatever. So humor can be very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely do, at least to myself, wonder about, particularly because Twitter, like social media in general, seems to really drive like even people's like radicalization now.
Right.
And it's like really this huge mediation from like just actual like real life, which is not to say that certain things that happen on the internet don't affect people emotionally. But for me, when I started out, I was coming from a place where I wasn't particularly interested in myself doing nonfiction political comics because I didn't feel like I had anything to contribute as a cartoonist. I was an anarchist and I was very involved in things, but they were almost very separate. So when I started doing comics about those things, I was like, well, this is sort of, I was imagining who would read it would be people who already had experience like on the street, for instance.
Right.
And I think as sort of, it's, there's more generations of particularly anarchists who are getting politicized on the internet, by themselves in a lot of cases, not in like a punk scene or anything. It's making me think like my own tone around these things. Because at first I was going to be like, oh, someone reading this already probably has some experience dealing with, a probably scary Nazi, but also just they're totally ridiculous people. Whereas now it's like people watch BreadTube videos making fun of fascists for like hours and hours and hours, but never actually engage with them in person. So I do think my own humor, I even in the last couple of years have found myself sort of thinking about my own presentation, particularly with humor in that way.
Right.
Should we go to question 2?
Sure.
Okay. The second question, when did you first employ even a hint of anti-fascism or abolition in your work? And when did you feel that this was going to be an element you will revisit in your creations to come? You can go as far back as you like because focal points shift in an artist's life?
Mm. Okay, well, so when I was a kid, I always wanted to do comics, but I could never. My problem was writing stories, and I had a really hard time coming up with fictional accounts and making up characters and stuff. So I didn't actually start doing comics until I became more politicized and I became involved in the anarchist movement. And I was mostly wanting to understand history. So when I started researching history, then at some points I wanted to make comics about this to make it more accessible to people. But the first anti-fascist comic thing I did was I think it was in 1990, and I was in I traveled to Europe, Western Europe, and I was in West Germany, and I went to this massive anti-fascist rally in Wunsiedel, which was a small town in the Bavarian region or something, and there was thousands of riot police. There was a couple thousand anti-fascists, and there was about 1,000 fascists marching in the streets. And when I got back to Canada, that was like one of the first serious attempts at doing a comic that I actually did. And I got about, I think I completed about 2 or 3 pages, and then I guess I lost interest. So that was the first time I really tried to do a serious comic, and it was an anti-fascist comic because that was something I'd experienced, and it was one of the bigger conflicts of my life at that time that I'd been involved in. Just the scale of the mobilization was something that really had a big impact on me, and seeing the German Antifa, kind of how they organize, and the German police, which one of the most advanced riot police in all of Europe at that time was the West German police, and of course that's where the Black Bloc comes from. So it was a pretty profound experience for me, and that's when my first Antifa type of comic.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, that's really cool. I'm always envious of people who have RR token levels, like scale levels of experiences like that. Coming, like being politicized in the South, like even just a normie liberal demonstration is only like 200 people. You know what I mean? It's a very small. Yeah. Like when you were making that comic, did you have in your mind, like, when you were starting it, were you like, oh, I want to share this comic with people where I'm at? Or was it just like, this was a dope experience and I want to draw it?
I think it was kind of both. I was doing zines at the time. I was involved in punk, so I was doing these punk zines, and I think my intention was to include it in one of my zines I published, but I like I said, I never finished it. Yeah.
Word. Yeah, I mean, that just drawing the crowd scenes alone, just I'm imagining it would be really difficult.
That's a lot of work. And I was also really influenced by, I think, Joe Sacco, who did the Palestine comics, because his stuff was all in black and white line work, but like lots and lots of detail. So I was kind of replicating his style. So yeah, it was a lot of work.
Yeah. I feel like that's the unseen labor of like a political cartoonist that writes about like street level stuff. It's like, you got to draw a lot of people, a lot of
yeah, because of the crowd scenes. Yeah, the big crowd scenes. The thing for me is like I can spend like a day working on a panel, and then someone will read it and they'll kind of glance over it, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then they're on to the next panel.
Right. Yeah, I remember starting out. I did this comic that was I wouldn't say that this was like an anti-fascist comic by any means, but like the first like overtly like political graphic novel I wanted to do was influenced by the IWW. I was like reading a lot about them. I was like, oh, I should read about, and I was really like, the whole thing I found, I think just sort of like their just the whole sort of like almost like insurrectionary energy of like the labor movement at that time, I felt really inspired by. And I worked really hard on it. I think I got like 100 and maybe 70 pages done.
Wow.
Before, it's like, and I remember showing it to somebody and they zipped right through it. And I was like, because of course it took years of my life, right? It was like, and they were like, yeah, it's cool. It took 20 minutes. I was so crushed.
Yeah. That's funny.
And I think for me, I think I think because of the generation I was, there's actually some people my age who were like involved in ARA or whatever, but I sort of missed that because that wasn't a tendency in the cities that I lived in. And I've lived in mostly Black cities, like Black neighborhoods in Black cities. So like I haven't, it was only more recently in which like the far right like really upsurged that I was like really interacting with like fascists and Nazis, and you know, like there might be a demo. Like I'm trying to think, there would be situations like me and some friends would go to like Memphis or Georgia or something where the Klan would have like a rally or something.
Right.
But that was always like the major fascists we were always dealing with were the police. That was like the primary thing. So I think pretty early on my comics, and I feel like maybe just very standard for a Black man in the United States. It's just like police killing Black people. That was like the first issue. You know what I mean? And the first like I dealt with the criminal justice system really early on. Like I think like 14 or something. So I already had this huge chip on my shoulder about cops. And that's more been the jumping off point than like, and it, you know, like it's interesting, like what the word abolition, like what abolition means sort of now, at least in the American context, it's become like very liberalized. But, you know, really early on, I was just like, I think even before, because I'm also very influenced by like the Black radical tradition. So like this concept that like the police are occupiers, you know what I mean, in Black communities, like that was really ingrained in me early on. So this idea that it was like, oh, we just need, so in my mind, it's like, these are the fascists, these who are trying to get the fuck out of our neighborhood. And I don't even remember the first time I made a comic about that, but it was probably really early on.
Yeah, for sure. So,
oh yeah, you want to read it?
Sure, I could do this one. Throughout history, we have our trailblazers, our freedom fighters that are highlighted in textbooks, documentaries, biopics, and they have main character moments that we immortalize those moments in the media. When we collectively center individuals in our movements, do you think it hurts or helps a cause more? Or does it depend? Hierarchies, do we need them?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think it's almost two different questions. You know what I mean? Like I do acknowledge like they sort of the great man history thing is, you know, that is like a hierarchy. I think for me though, like, and I don't know what it was like for you, but the anarchist milieu that I came up in and spent a lot of time in was mostly white. So like looking for like Lucy Parsons, for instance, like looking, or like Kwesi Balagoon, like Black anarchists was really important to me. And of course they're, you know, so I think there's this sort of balance between representation, particularly if you're a minority, you know, like within a milieu, can be really, really important. But also, of course, there's sort of like, what is a better word? Like hero worship that I think is like not incredibly helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there are individuals who've had a profound influence on movements or actions, so they are naturally centered in a story, I think, just because of the influence they had. But generally, I try to downplay the individual leader kind of concept. So in the Antifa comic, I don't really focus a lot on individual personalities. It's just kind of like a broad movement. With the 500 years of indigenous resistance, there's definitely historical personalities that played big roles, at least as we understand it through our history. So like Pontiac organizing the rebellion against the British. So he's an important player in that moment of history. And I think, and I try to show that they're just like one person that was influential and they had a leader role, but that there was thousands of people involved in these movements. And now when we look back, like someone like Pontiac could be an inspiring kind of role model, like a hero. But yeah, I mean, it is a balancing act, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I think particularly for writing, it's like we're not, I think just as like we're taught how we tell stories generally, it is very like individually focused, you know, like showing someone's arc. And I find it's like really hard to how do you decenter a particular point of view within a story? It's like often that's just like not a very compelling story, or it's like a story that's hard to sort of like emotionally attach to, you know, like certainly there's, you know, like the documentary form, there's plenty of documentaries that are not particularly focused on one person's point of view, you know what I mean? There's also a lot of really boring documentaries. I think for me, something that I find fortunate just in terms of like my own points of reference politically is that like, you know, I think I've been thinking a lot about the influence of like, say, like Malcolm X on like the Black radical tradition. Now, Malcolm X, I both admire in many ways, but as I'm not a religious person, there's a lot of things within the Nation of Islam in particular I do not agree with. And there's a lot of like even his post, like the brief period of time where he was transitioning out, there's a lot of his politics I do not agree with, but his influence is undeniable, right? But I feel like something that's like sort of fortunate, particularly if you're an anarchist, like you're not looking for like a perfect role model. Part of the story is the things that you disagree with. And I feel that like just within that subverts sort of this tendency to sort of like just wholly venerate this one person. I always really love this Du Bois quote, another person who I have very complicated feelings about, but he has this quote, it's history paints perfect men, but it never tells the truth. And I feel like that's like just a real, another one of those things where it's like, as soon as you basically depict someone honestly, they stop, in my opinion, they stop being, you know, so these idealized people we're supposed to hero worship. Right. I do think like, because, you know, like within the anarchist community, it's definitely not immune from like social hierarchies and like, you know, like personalities, like really being centered. And I do wonder, particularly people who are like very charismatic or like conventionally attractive or, you know, or have like a lot of access to information. And I think that like there is a lot more space within the at least the anarchist community that I interact with to sort of speak to that more often. You know what I mean? To do, I don't know, to sort of like talk about like what it means to sort of like romanticize groups of people more, not necessarily crime think way, but in like, you know, there does, and I feel like I still struggle with that. I definitely don't feel like I've yet made like a pure anarchist comic. I've made a comic about anarchists, but I definitely don't think I've made, like when I was doing Sports as Hell, that was like an attempt to make like a insurrectionary comic in which like, you know, there's sort of this joke about like a football riot or whatever. And despite it winning an Eisner Award, it did feel like a failure at the end because it just really feel like exactly what I was trying to do at all, you know?
Right. One thing about the anarchist movement in general, it's like as soon as someone rises to become a bit of a star, there's anarchists that will go in, they're trying to pull them down and knock them off. Any pedestals that exist, there's going to be anarchists chipping away at that to knock them off. So that's kind of one thing about the anarchist movement. You're never going to have a really super celebrity superstar thing happening, I don't think.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, you're right. We're really good at hating on people. And I guess there's no infrastructure really to like, you know, I feel like there's plenty of celebrities who get torn down, but there's like infrastructure to keep them employed or something. And as far as you know, it's not like, you know, AK Press is not handing out like $1 million deals, as far as I know, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, there's more questions. Okay. Question 4. One thing that was really apparent in the beginning of the pandemic was that folks who no longer had public access to the internet because public libraries were closed. Not everyone had phones. People leave flyers and zines on trains and other methods of public transport. What are some of the ways you can still reach each other barrier-free when sharing information in a time of public quarantine and curfews/limited access? What are some really cool ways you ever came across comics or zines that shaped your politics or kept you in the loop? Also, do you think there's a gap in offline engagement in the anarchist community because there's such a huge engagement online?
I don't know. I've always been into posters and graffiti type of stuff in terms of public communication. And I always promote a diversity of communication forms. So we have radio, video, zines, books, comics, and all that stuff. But I always like the idea of the poster and the graffiti stuff because it's like you mark your territory. And when someone goes into a neighborhood, you know that this is a political neighborhood. There's these posters up, and it kind of claims territory. In terms of the other one, have I ever come across comics or zines that shaped your politics? Yeah, I don't really know about that. I usually find them in the radical bookstores and stuff like that. Although recently because I've been moving a bunch here where I'm living, I took a whole bunch of my radical literature that I don't really use anymore, and I've taken it down to the thrift store here, and I'm curious as to what they're going to do with it because it's one of those little Christian-run thrift stores. So I wonder what they're doing with some of the material I brought there.
Yeah, maybe you show up one day and it's an anarchist bookstore.
That'd be funny. Oh my God.
Yeah, I really I'm trying to think. I mean, one of my favorite, it wasn't specifically anarchist, but there was a little while that guys in Orleans Parish Prison were making comics about the conditions in the prison to share with each other. And I thought that was really cool. And also that's like a format in which it makes sense, people passing kites and stuff. I think that it's interesting, in my experience, there's not a lot of cartoonists that I run into that make comics, but I know a lot of anarchists that like comics. Right. I feel like anarchism is definitely it's like a very print media community in that way, because it's we all, zines. There's a bookstore, or not even really a bookstore, there's sort of like a book project called Iffy Books here that's DIY and hacker focused, and it's all these zines and stuff. But yeah, I agree with you, Gord. Here in Philly, you'll see the battles between fascists will put shit up, and then you'll see the buff over it and stuff. There's Philly is definitely still one of those American cities in which there's a lot of anarchist graffiti all over the place. And you can really tell where anarchists are at least more active, if not living in these areas. I remember going to Montreal during the student movement stuff and going into I forget what neighborhood, but there was all this anti-fascist graffiti all over the place. And as just traveling somewhere new, I don't know anything about these communities. I felt I was oh, great. You know what I mean? If I got a problem, maybe my odds are better, right? That out, So yeah, I agree. These stuff are really important. Yeah, I mean, hopefully, in my experience, anarchist milieus I've been a part of have always been really sort of affinity group focused. Here in Philadelphia, people get really obsessed about different ideas, composting, or anywhere from there's Philly, PA, which is a decades old anarchist group that is, or anti-fascist group, to there's kickboxing groups, there's lock breaking groups, there's just reading groups. And to me, and that does not require the internet at all. And as long as anarchists, that's been a thing. It's people sort of generate these little mutual aid groups. Sometimes that don't last very long. Sometimes they last for a long time. It's very anarchist, right? It exists as long as it's useful.
Yeah.
So I think outside of the specifics of comics, that is like, I think that's always going to be a useful thing that I hope anarchists continue to do. And I think that maybe I'm just really hoping that the kids' desire to like interact without the mediation of the internet, that they will just like seek out sort of these groups. I think something that I've noticed, or that I want particularly within Black anarchism, there's this tendency towards like mass mobilization, that I think has to do with the influence of like Marxism within like the Black radical tradition, as opposed to like mostly white men anarchist milieux I've been a part of are like very antagonistic to the idea of mass mobilizations, which is whatever. It is what it is. But I think something that that I think a lot of like queer nihilists and like anarcho-insurrectionaries and different kinds of like less social anarchists have been good at is that they are satisfied with the group that they have and try to like meet and figure out, you know, what they can do together, as opposed to like just constantly waiting, or often just sort of like watering down your politic to try to appeal to the most people as possible.
Yeah.
And I think whatever, you can do both if you want to, but I do think that like, yeah, these little groups like work really, really well together in that sense, and that they don't need the internet. But yeah, I think a really good thing for people to do, you know, like if you want to, like here, there's the subway here, and buses, like, you know, you can sticker buses, you can, you know, you can throw bombs up in buses, you can, you're writing bombs, whatever. You can leave out like little chick track style comics if you want to. I think it's a really nice way to get a layout of the city and get active, particularly during a pandemic, you know, if you're feeling locked up.
Just thinking of one example of like in Vancouver on the transit buses, the transit company used to put out this little newsletter. It was called The Buzzer. It was based on the buzzer you pull when you want the bus to stop. And the anarchists started producing almost an exact copy of The Buzzer, but it was called The Buzzard. And it was like a little anarchist newsletter that they would print thousands of these and go into the buses and replace the buzzer with the buzzard. And that was a pretty, that's a pretty clever way of getting out, you know, information, counter information. That was a bigger thing in the late 80s, was just producing counter information bulletins. There was Eco Media in Toronto was pretty successful at putting out this stuff. But there's always been definitely a strong focus on printed matter within the anarchist scene, like you mentioned. And I've even been approached over the last few years of anarchists who like despise the internet and social media stuff, and they want to continue publishing, self-publishing zines and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool. Like I think that's a good thing. Like that, it's the diversity of communications, because we need all the forms of communication working to reach as many people as we can. But yeah. I see there's another question. Should we move on to that?
Yeah,
I could read it.
Okay, cool.
Question 5. Even now, we face the issue of censorship in the comic arts community. As creators, to be provided with a guideline of what you can share in your work or not. What are some of the insights you can share on how to navigate censorship safely while keeping our communities informed and also being happy with the work you produce? Have you experienced censorship in your work?
Not really. I had the problems that I have had with editors or publications haven't been like something that I would say is like overt censorship. There's been things where it's like it's been a couple of years, but I did have an issue for a little bit with a white editor who's like sort of their like point of view. I think they were not aware of how antagonistic they were to sort of like my worldview, just as like a very, you know, run of the mill, albeit pretty radical Black person. And that became an issue, but I just asked for another, you know, I just got another editor. I did some work for the New York Times and they didn't want some overt anti-fascist stuff. Yeah, I think the New York Times thing is like the only is the only example of that. And they basically were like, but I think that the spirit of the comic that I was trying to do, like remained, and it was really about removing something from a t-shirt. So I was like, I don't really care. I think honestly, like the more professional work I do, and sometimes I think about this, is like, I don't like, I think because I was someone who self-published for a really long time, when I do some work for, like, say, the New York Times, I'm not expecting them to allow me to do a lot of, like, cool, exactly what I want to do. You know what I mean? So I think to some degree, I will just decide what I'm trying to do within what I expect the confines to already be. And I'm like, I will continue to advocate, the total discretion of capitalism and the white supremacist state in my own time. And this one job I do, I don't really care. But to be honest, I've not experienced a lot of censorship. Have you?
Yeah. No, not really. Yeah, I mean, the first comic I had published, I thought it was there's quite a lot of violence in it. Settlers being attacked and killed and stuff like that. And I was quite surprised Arsenal was willing to publish it. And when it came time to do the other comics with Arsenal, I always felt really free. Like, and they never did censor me. The only issues I had was one with I think it was in the anti-capitalist comic on the chapter about the anti-Olympic movement, and they were quite concerned about the Olympic industry suing them, especially through the use of corporate logos. So they had me change a bunch of the logos, so it wasn't Adidas, and I had to do a variation of these different corporate logos. And one other thing with that same comic was a scene from the WTO protest in Seattle in 1999, where I had a cop was knocked out, and one of the editors wasn't clear if that cop was dead or alive. So I think I did these the spinning stars, like you get a concussion.
Yeah.
So that's how I dealt with that. But yeah, otherwise I haven't really dealt with too much censorship. And I agree. Like, if I was to get a job with like a corporate newspaper or publisher, I would probably tone my thing down a little bit. I guess you could call it almost self-censoring, but I'm kind of like, it's more realistic and pragmatic that they're not going to allow me to do some of the really graphic, violent, resistant stuff that I also did myself because I was self-publishing. So, but it's just a reality of, if you want to reach a really big audience going with that corporate route, they're probably going to have some conditions on what they're actually going to publish in their newsletter or whatever. So
yeah, for sure. I think in general, I just hope that, like, people will, because I'm like this. It's like, if I read a cartoonist that I like, I will go out and find the other things that they. So it's like, I'm gonna spend however much time doing this, like, one pager for the New York Times. You can go and read all the crazy shit that that I did, what I mean? So I'm not, what I mean? I'm, if anything, I guess, like you say, it's an open door to like whatever the rest of the work that I do. I think, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think one of the, like, something that I have sort of experienced a bit with all kinds of people, sometimes readers or like, peers or something. They'll be like, Ben, you're really political. Like, why are you working for so and so? And there's certainly people I won't work with. I've made, like, or I won't contribute to, like, I was asked to contribute to this sort of anthology whose theme I was not even clear on, but it included Mitch Landrieu, who's the mayor of New Orleans, who seems like just a banal figure, but, like, I mean, I don't like any mayors, but particularly this mayor was like, I had friends that caught charges under his administration. Like, he gutted the city of New Orleans. Like, I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? Like, even though it was a good career move, I'm not gonna do it. But like I said, I've worked for the New York Times, who I don't think is, like, a deeply reputable or moral publication. I think it's the sort of I think there's there's sort of like there is this sort of like this balancing. It's like if you're a cartoonist and you're trying to make money at it, you are a technician, you know, like you're a professional. And I think, and you're also a political person. And for me, I think it's something I didn't think. I think until someone was like, "Oh, would you like?" Someone was like, "You wouldn't do." I forget what the question was. Like, would you work for Marvel for money? And I was like, I mean, maybe. You know, like I'm a professional. They're like, but you got these politics. Like, look, I'm an anarchist all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and my anarchism is not really even defined personally by the art that I do. It is a part of it, but like you know, at the end of the day, I would not feel satisfied if all I was doing was comic books. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, if I had a chance to work for Marvel, I probably would. But that would just be like one small part of my life, like one job I had. I mean, there's other people out there working for AT&T and they're anarchists. You know, they're like, you know, they're working at a supermarket or a bank or whatever. So it's just different means we have to use to for our economic well-being living in this system. I mean, I think we all have principles, and there's some things we just wouldn't do, but there's some things that we would do because it's just practical and it's what we need to do at that moment or something. Yeah.
Oh, cool. We got more questions. Oh man. What do we have? Question 6?
Yeah.
Okay. Question 6. A lot of anti-fascist and abolitionism works and art centers proletariat. Where does that leave folks who perhaps don't fit the mold of the proletariat identity, folks who cannot access labor due to systematic barriers, such as having been incarcerated or undocumented folks and otherwise? Where do they fit in those narratives, and who are those in your minds when you create in this realm of thinking?
I think with my Antifa comic back in when I was doing the history in the 1920s in Italy and Germany, there you definitely have like a proletariat. But I think once it got into the more modern anti-fascist movements, I didn't center the workers' struggle because I don't really see it as the center of anti-fascist struggles. Certainly not in North America. Like it seems to be it's a very broad, diverse collective. Some people are definitely working class, and there's a lot of, I think, like just a lot of unemployed, like what you call the lumpen proletariats involved in Antifa, and a lot of middle class kids as well. So with my anti-fascist stuff and the more modern things, I don't think I really involve class as much. It's just a struggle between anti-fascist movement and these fascist groups. So I don't think that the proletariat is really centered. I think it's hard to center the proletariat in this post-industrial type of society we kind of live in. And a lot of the proletariat, I mean, there's good chunks of the white proletariat that are kind of engaged with the right wing or the far right at this moment, I feel. And it's such a different world than the 1920s and the 1930s. Like we're living in a completely different type of society. It's way more diverse, way more fractured, I think. With the proletariat in the 20s and the 30s, you had a lot of workers who were veterans of World War I, and they were very well armed, and they joined the anti-fascist movements, you know, en masse. You had thousands and thousands of armed veteran workers in the anti-fascist movement, and we don't have, that's not the case today. But if you look at the far right, you have you still have this very large armed militia, kind of like the the stormtrooper thing in Nazi Germany with the forget what they're called now, all the combat veterans who were basically kicked out of the military after the Treaty of Versailles, who became the brown shirts. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
all those ex-soldiers. So it's very different times nowadays, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like, it's not even, at least in my experience, like the bulk of active anti-fascists that I know, like some are certainly working class, but like, yeah, like there's a lot of middle class kids from the suburbs, and a lot of like, particularly when I lived in the South, like a lot of criminals, like a lot, on like on different, whether that be like sex workers or people that, sell stolen REI jackets, on eBay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty wide range. So I definitely agree with that. And also like just the way that race functions in the United States, like the racial caste system functions in the United States, I think makes sort of that, sort of like that, I don't know, that analysis seemed too simplistic. I mean, the first thing because I don't know, like I read a bit of Marx, you know what I mean, but have never been particularly very interested. That's not the source of like my, critical analysis of capitalism. My childhood in poverty was, but it's something that, I think a lot about is like the split that happened in the Panthers, like one of the splits, other than like, Huey being kind of a megalomaniac, was sort of this idea that like Huey thought that the proletariat was going to be the vanguard, and people, were like, Eldredge says that no, it's the lump-ins, and the BLA themselves sort of repeated this like a different dichotomy, which I think is like I think much more relevant with, at least within the radical Black community, that Malcolm X sort of stated. He was like, there's the house Negro and there's the field Negro, and the house Negro is like a part of his position is a choosing to buy into like, the master's narrative, his infrastructure, and the field Negro is not. And I guess I like that because it's not everyone from privilege is choosing to be there. I know anarchists who are very active who come from a lot of wealth. You know what I mean? And certainly that's harder to do, because that's a comfortable place to be. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like what you can do, like, I don't know, like, certainly the older I get, the more I reflect on my sort of younger insistence that like the most important, or like sort of like everyone who wants to sort of engage in anti-fascism needs to be in physical combat with Nazis. And I still think that's incredibly important. I acknowledge not everyone feels like they can do that. I do feel like, given that like my fascists, these are very specific groups, like I acknowledge that. But I also just include the police and the prison system within that. And if you include that within that, like you can include like people like the Vaughn 17, who took over a prison and beat a guard to death, an abusive guard to death, and I would include that in anti-fascist action. And certainly like there's plenty of those guys like Dwayne Statz or Rome who would overtly say that we are anti-fascist and include the police in that. So I don't know, like sometimes I think that like because like particularly anarchists and anti-fascists within the United States, I don't know about Canada, but like it's a very small community, and sort of like what we feel like needs to be done is really terrifying. It can be easy, and I've experienced this, to talk yourself out of like, asking yourself like, what can I do, even though I'm afraid? And sometimes like some of the focus on, some of the focus is on like where you lie on like the privilege ladder, can sometimes contribute to excuses for not being active. I mean, I look the way I look, but certainly people have talked to me about like well, you're like the only black person sometimes amongst all these white people. Don't you get afraid? It's like, sure, you know what I mean? But like, what, like, I'm not going to not, I'm in danger either way, number one. And number two, it's like, what, am I going to do nothing? So, yeah.
Yeah. Question 7. You both bring up really valid points about how you navigate opportunities while holding space for your identities and values. On that note, what are your insights? Well, myself, like, I don't actually feel like I'm part of a comic book industry. I've done these comics because I think it's a really effective form of communication, because young children can read them, and older people who might not have strong literacy skills, or people who are just tired from work and maybe can pick up a comic and start going through it. But really, I don't really feel like I'm part of the comic book industry. And if there's unionizing efforts going on, I don't know about them, and I don't think it would really affect me as a comic artist too much, because I've mostly just worked with Arsenal, and they've been really supportive. They've been a really good publisher. So yeah, what about yourself? Maybe this is more in the US or something?
I know that I'm pretty sure like Michael DeForge and some people like in Toronto are like
I think we lost you.
Oh, can you not hear me? Can you hear me? You're good? Okay. So yeah, I think there are some people in Canada doing it. I think that sometimes like the tone of, or like the enthusiasm for unionizing with the United States feels like it's not necessarily like acknowledging the kind of troubled history of unions within labor itself. I mean, it's definitely been like a counter-revolutionary force in the long run. But yeah, and so I don't have. Oh, Gord can't hear me. Should I keep talking? Can you hear me at all? I hear some feedback. Still can't hear me? Nope. Oh shit. I think I can hear you now. I heard oh shit. Okay, we're both good. Okay, cool. I think that I definitely, I guess I'm definitely part of the comics industry, certainly, and I'm picking up jobs and stuff. I'm definitely interested to hear like what a comics union would look like, because of like how novel the job is. Yeah, it's just a different. We're not all working in one single building with one boss. Like myself, I will work with multiple different outlets, throughout the year. Certainly more transparency around payment is important. I honestly think there's a lot of things we can do to support each other that we don't necessarily have to institutionalize. And if I'm totally honest, while anarchists tend to be, very organized people, we are deeply anti-institutional. So I'm apprehensive to create any sort of like organization around mine or anyone else's work. But I don't know. I do also want to put people on. Myself, what that looks like now is that like me, people I know, even new people that, I meet, I try to be really transparent about what the job is like, what working with people are like, and try to be available. I know that doesn't scale, like infinitely, but yeah, I'm pretty apprehensive to join an institution as an anarchist, if I'm totally honest. But I am open. I am open to the conversation. Gord, can you hear us again or no?
Yeah, since we're editing, I can just sort of jump in. We can do some tech checks. So this will be edited out. Thanks so much, Ben, and Gord. And then we'll hit y'all with the last question. But Gord, can you hear us? I should write that down.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. I can hear. Maybe he just can't hear. Is it his headphones?
Are you able to take off headphones?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, I've had weird things with the earphones cutting off my audio before.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or not use them.
Where I have some shitty Bluetooth headphones I used to wear for these Zoom calls, but I had to stop because it kept on cutting out.
Okay. Yeah. Huh.
Technology.
Yeah.
We're just at the last question, y'all, and then I can just hop back in once y'all done. Thank you again for everything. This is great. I didn't mean to interrupt y'all with my prompts. I just wanted to make sure the questions were there for y'all.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it helps a lot. Last question. What are you both looking forward to working on, and what are you currently engaging in that you'd like folks to know about or check out?
Yeah, do you want to go first?
Sure. So right now I'm just doing my graphic art and stuff for different projects or whatever. But the thing I'm waiting on right now is this it's like 100-page black and white comic about the residential schools, I think mostly in Canada. And I'm just waiting for the script to come in. And it's a really good group. I've worked with them before. They provide me with the script and like all kinds of like reference photos. And they even give me a script breakdown of the panel breakdown of what they want in the panels. So it's a really, I'm pretty excited about it. I like doing black and white because I don't have to color it. It just makes it quicker. And not having to do all the research and all the writing, it helps out a lot in terms of enjoying producing a comic book when you don't have to do all that stuff. And you can just kind of focus on creating the artwork. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm supposed to get started on that after the summer.
Oh, that sounds dope. That sounds great. Do you know who's putting it out?
I'm not sure who the publisher is. I think I'm working with. I think it's with the Graphic History Collective.
Okay.
One of the people from that, I think. Yeah.
Cool. That sounds dope. I'm looking forward to reading.
Yeah, pretty cool. I hope. It's a really big issue here in Canada now because they're finding all these unmarked graves at all the residential schools. There's like hundreds and hundreds, thousands of them have been found, and they haven't even searched all the grounds of all the residential schools yet. So it's kind of good timing in terms of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading about that. It was fucking horrifying.
Yeah.
Fucking terrible. Sorry. Myself, I'm still working on the Black Arms to Hold You Up graphic novel that's ostensibly about like 7 individuals or groups around Black nationalism, but it's not even just Black nationalism in particular. It's revolutionary Black violence. Because I wanted to sort of talk about or sort of connect in some cases like not very well known sort of people along sort of this through line of like Black revolutionary violence within the 20th century mostly. it's meant doing like just a crazy amount of research. Like I'm definitely like too much of a talker, particularly like socially. So like I felt like, you know, like when I was pitching the book, I was like, oh, I know this topic. I can just do this. And then when I sat down, I was like, no, I don't know enough about this stuff. Yeah, I'm writing about that and sort of figuring out how to, especially because I don't know, you know, I filter things through laughter. It's something my therapist is working on me about. But I just know that like the book, yeah, figuring out the tone of the book right now has been the real issue. Is like, yeah, there's a lot of death and violence and a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of cool things, and just like how to make that, you know, work within, you know, the tone that I'll know that I'll have, which is a little funny. So far is been the challenge. And then after that, I don't really know. Like it's the biggest book I've done in a really long time with a major publisher. So the sheer amount of work and anxiety, it's hard for me to imagine what I'm going to do after this. I do want to do more collaboration. And speaking of the guy Dwayne Stats in Bond 17, he's in prison for multiple life sentences, and he actually did a comic about solitary confinement that we've been trying to find a publisher for. So I think in the future I want to. He does have an Instagram. It's sort of hard for him, you know, that his son put up, but I want to do more things around that, more stuff around prisons. There's definitely researching. The more you read about Black nationalism, the more just like the amount of like very inspiring people are just like currently dying in prison in like solitary confinement. So it just feels like an increasingly important thing for me to focus on. Only like a couple months ago, Russell Maroon Shoatz got out of prison and died a couple months later, and I did get the opportunity. I'd made friends with his kids way before that. So I was at the funeral, but it definitely cemented that, because, you know, like it was a very small funeral, like given who he was, you know, no heroes, you know, but also he's an incredible person. And it's sad to see him die unceremoniously. So.
Right. How large do you think that comic is that you're working on is going to be?
At least 200 pages.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it's going to be
That's
200
awesome.
pages. Thanks. Yeah. Honestly, it's much like I thought that I was going to have trouble filling up that space, but just the sheer amount of information, it's actually not. I mean, you would know more than me. It's actually, it's going to be really actually fitting all that stuff in there.
Yeah. I end up cutting out a lot of history that makes the history, and then there's a lot that's just like shed and it's left out because it just because of space. And then I was also working with deadlines, so deadlines make it a little more difficult to kind of do everything you want to do. So you have to in my case, I have to compromise and decide this isn't as important as this, and this is what I think I really want to have in the comic book, because there was more stories in the 500 years that I wanted to include, but because of the deadline, because publishers have deadlines, because they got to do all their pre-marketing and they got to set up the whole printing press thing, and everything's got to be timed. So that's one thing about deadlines. If you don't have a deadline, you're a lot freer to develop your story in the comic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah. Is that it? Did we do a good job?
I think y'all were amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Gord Hill and Ben Passmore, for sharing your insights and experiences on anarchism, anti-fascism, and abolitionism, all while employing comics as a medium. Thank you all for coming out to Anarchism and Comics panel. Comics and zines have been at the core of organizing for a very long time, and hopefully we can have more these discussions in the future. Please check out more of our programs at TCAF, and thanks again. Thank you both.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having me.
having us. Thanks for organizing it.
Creative arts and animation. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Canada Council for the Arts, the Ontario Art Council, and the Toronto Art Council for their generous support. Special thanks, of course, to the Beguiling Books and Art. I hope you enjoyed the time. Thank you so much for it, and we'll see you again soon.